Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Nicole, and today I'm going to be talking about what I've been reading in the last week, basically. And so here's the stack that I'll show you real quickly. And I have been enjoying almost some of these books. I don't know. Let's get into it. So I have no DNFs this week, but I have one that's hanging on the edge, and I just don't know what to do with. And I'll get to that when I get to my currently readings. But I do have 2 books that I have finished so far this week, which kinda confounds me because I was sure it was gonna be 3, if not 4 books, but again, I'll get into that when I get to the currently readings. Right now, let's stay in a happy place and talk about the books that I finished. So, the first book that I finished is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. And this is a book that has been on my TBR list for quite a while and that I really, really just wanted to read. It had buzzwords that just made me go, oh, I've got to pick that up, including dystopian and pandemic and Shakespeare and King Lear. And as soon as I heard those things, I was like, yeah, that sounds like something I want to read. And it was good. I really enjoyed this. This book is about basically a massive epidemic that happens across the world that kills off about 99% of the world's population and leads to people kind of traveling and trying to figure out how to do life again. Because basically, even though it's supposed to take place in modern times, this epidemic has basically destroyed civilization as we know it. And she really gets into just how quickly things can just fall apart, which is ironic because I just read things fall apart. Um, when you have a huge portion of the population all day at once. This story follows Kirsten and her journey basically from childhood into being a woman. There are quite a few time jumps and things like that. But you follow her story and just it's a story of survival basically. To me it reminds me a bit of what I've heard of McCormick's The Road. I've never read that book, but just what I have heard about that book reminds me of this book, and I feel like they would probably be similar in that if you liked The Road, you might like this book. I don't know. Um, what do I have to say about this book? So, some of the lows in this book for me were the structure. You get multiple perspectives, kind of, sort of people's experience of this situation. It jumps around structurally a lot, forward and backward and present in time, as well as bouncing all around through these people's different perspectives. And that's probably my biggest criticism was I was not a fan of the structure of this book. I felt like it was one of the weakest points. I somewhat understood what she was trying to do, but it just didn't work for me. I felt like the different perspectives, rather than lending more to the story, to me felt like distractions at times. Some of the side stories felt unnecessary. Um, and some of the side stories felt like ones that I wish I had gotten more of. There were times where the book also felt a bit repetitive in terms of making the comparisons of what was going on here with King Lear and making the comparisons to, why they were performing Shakespeare. I felt like I got beat over the head with the idea of why they were performing Shakespeare. So, yeah, there were structurally a few things that didn't work. And I also wanted the writing to be just a little bit better than it was, but that's me getting really picky. The biggest issue that I had was just with the structure. Like, I get how she was trying to tell these different stories and have them all come together, but it just didn't work for me. And in fact, if you liked that aspect of the story, I would say a better version of that same idea would be Cloud Cuckoo Land. If you want to read about different perspectives and different storylines all being interconnected and coming together in beautiful writing, Cloud Cuckoo Land is the book for you. If you enjoyed this, you will enjoy that even more. And honestly, I have to say it may be because I've read Cloud Cuckoo Land and that was the comparison that I couldn't help but make, that this book fell a bit short for me. That said, there were a lot of things that I liked about this book. The main storyline with Kirsten was really fascinating. There was kind of a mystery that was going on there. There were some things that were just unsolved puzzles that you wanted to know what was happening. That whole storyline and plot really kept me reading through the book. I usually don't have a problem with multiple perspectives. I usually don't don't feel like, oh, I liked this person and not that person. So every time I went back to their story, I was like, I don't care. In this book, I felt that way. But with Kirsten's story, I was involved. I cared about her. I cared about the symphony troupe that she was traveling with, or the traveling symphony, I think it was called. I cared about all the people in that. I thought the characters were really well developed and interesting. Even the side characters and subplots and side stories had characters that really fascinated me. I think that's one of her strongest suits is the characterization in this book is just really excellent. Emily St. John Mandel does a really good job of just getting you to care about these people. Even some of the people who you feel like are more maybe gray characters, you sort of understand the trauma and the drama that they're living through. And the book is very atmospheric. There are times where it feels very beautiful, but a lot of the times it feels very dark and creepy and just uncivilized. So this is a really well done novel. For me, it's a tough call, guys. I gotta say it's somewhere between a 3 and a 4, but I'll give it a 4. It was good. It was good. It just wasn't great, and I really wanted it to be great, especially given how long I had waited to read this book. If you liked this book, because I know a lot of people do, let me know what you liked about it and why it might have been a 5 for you, especially if it was a 5 for you. But if it was a 5 for you, definitely read Cloud Cuckoo Land because I really think you'll enjoy that book. Anyway, Station 11, glad I read it. Also kind of glad I got it from the library and that I don't own it because I'm pretty sure it's a book that I would unhaul because I honestly don't see myself reading this book again. The second book that I finished this week is Snowflower and the Secret Fan by Lisa Lee. I don't remember how I heard about this book, but I am so glad I picked this up. I'm going to say right off the bat that this book was between a 4 and a 5 for me. It tells the story of Lily, who is a young woman growing up in 18th century, no, 19th century China. And it is historical fiction about 19th century China, which is a time period where all of society is basically living in Confucian society setup. Lily comes from a poor class family. They are farmers. And this is during the time in China's history, if you're not familiar with that, where foot binding was very prominent and very much a part of their culture. While the book itself is not largely about foot binding, because I would say this book is about women's culture and women's society and Confucian culture, you do hear quite a bit about foot binding. In fact, I would say a content warning is that if you don't want to hear graphic details about how that works, you may want to skip that part or maybe not read this book. That said, I think one of the strongest things about this book is just how it gets you so deep into like an understanding of Confucian society and the culture of particularly the women at that time in a patriarchal society and how they thought and saw foot binding and how they felt about Confucian society at that time. I think it's very easy as outsiders to look in and just say these women are oppressed and it's bad and this is all the men doing these things to them. And I think this book breaks a lot of stereotypes and brings a lot of understanding into this time period. There's still plenty in here that, you won't agree with and that, the author's not even trying to get you to agree with or sympathize with, but she's trying, I feel like, to bring understanding and empathy to the situation. And I feel like after reading this, I certainly had a lot of myths and rumors broken down for me, and that I just have a better understanding of Chinese culture at that time period. I think one of the great things that this book has made me want to do is to read more historical information about this time period and to just learn more about the women of China, because these are some very strong women who, at least in this book, went through a lot of really harsh situations. So, outside the historical factors of this book, I think it was also just really great characters again. There was some wonderful characterization. There was also a bit of a mystery going on in this where there were just some things, information that was being withheld from our main character and therefore was being withheld from us because there was a fabulous narrative voice throughout this entire book. It was told in the first person. I kind of felt like I was having a letter written to me by an older widowed woman, as she calls herself at the beginning of the book, and you are just sucked into her story and just want to know what has happened in her life because she keeps alluding to things, but you have to read the whole book to find out what she's talking about. And that gets me to one of the lows of this book, which is, to me, the weakest part of this book was just the way the mystery was kind of dragged out. And that's what it felt like to me. It felt like it was dragging out this sort of hidden secret that then, once I discovered it, yes, was kind of a surprise, but I felt like could have been revealed a lot sooner than it was. I don't know. There were just a couple of things in this book that I felt like I waited all this time for this, and it should have just been a little shorter, I guess, because something about the way she went about withholding the information didn't work. I think she withheld too much for too long, maybe, because the reveals were pretty amazing, especially the reveal at the end of the book. I mean, I more or less so sobbed quietly in bed at 1 o'clock in the morning at the end of this book because I just had to finish it. So even though that was like a pretty big negative for me, it still moved me in the end. This is a really good book. I would recommend it to anyone who likes historical fiction, who would like to hear more about 19th century China. I think the fascinating part to remember about this is taking place during the Victorian period. So while you have women in Victorian England who are working on their corsets and trying to, make their waist as tiny as possible because that is the standard of beauty, you have women in China who are trying to bind their feet and make their feet as small as possible because that is their standard of beauty. So there are a lot of correlations to that. When you think about, just beauty and the suffering that we can go through to be beautiful and the status that can come with that. So those are some things to think about if you would like to read this book, but I would recommend it to anyone who likes historical fiction and beautiful writing because the writing in this is very beautiful, very gripping, and it will just carry you through to the end. And that brings me to the three books that I am currently reading. And I guess I will start with the easiest one, which is actually my book for the Big Book Summer Challenge. And that is And Ladies of the Club. I am currently 300 pages in. I still have to do my reading for today. I am reading about 44 pages of this massive book a day. That should have me, I should probably check that, but that should have me finish this book by Labor Day, which is when the challenge ends. This is a reread for me. I read this book a really long time ago in high school, and it is about a group of women in Waynesboro, Ohio, during the 18th century. No, 19th century. I'm sorry. So basically around the same time as Snowflower and the Secret Fan. And it's like 1860 to 1899 or something like that in Ohio. And it's just a book about historically all the things that the women go through as they start this literary club and they go from young womanhood up through their adult lives as they try and navigate life in their town, life as women and then mothers, and also navigating all the historical things that are going on in the US at that time. And I talked about how, it just brings up a lot of major historical events, including building of the railroads. At this point, we're getting into the Depression. You have the suffragist movement. There's talk of civil rights because you're getting towards the end of Reconstruction. At the beginning of the book, you're still sort of at the beginning of Reconstruction, whether or not that should have even happened or continued. And there's just a lot of like political machinations, not in deep, deep detail, but going on in the background. And it gets brought up, and the women, it affects their lives or it doesn't affect their lives, or it's just mentioned in passing, but it's just really, really interesting historical context. I am tabbing it and keeping my thoughts on it, and I'm enjoying this read. It is a slow paced read though, so that is why I have decided to slow it down to just 44 pages a day, because I realized it's a slow enough read that I don't feel like reading it all day long. And I think if I did that, it would put me in a reading slump. But 44 pages a day is just enough to keep the story moving and to make me want to come back for more the next day. So the reason that I said let me start with the easy one is because the next two ones I have like all sorts of feelings about. So I'll start with No Longer at Ease by Chinua Achebe. This is a book I borrowed from the library. It is the second book in the African trilogy, which is the series that starts with Things Fall Apart. And I was really excited to read this book because I enjoyed Things Fall Apart so much that I just didn't want to stop. And so I was like, let me go on to book two. My library had it, I got it. And when I went to go and pick it up, I said, I'm pretty sure I've read this book before. And that my thoughts were on it were the first book was better. And so far, I'm feeling that way again. I didn't get very far into it. I think I just read the first chapter or two, maybe even just the first chapter, and it's just not grabbing me. It's just stuff is happening, but it's not really clear what. I mean, granted, I'm not that far into the books. That's probably why I don't understand, but it's it's just going on in such a way that I don't even know that I care to find out. Like it's not piquing my curiosity enough for me to want to keep reading. Um there's just too many mysteries and too many unknowns, and I'm not being given enough to be curious. So I think I'll finish. I want to finish because I want to know, and it's not long. It's only 200 pages, and the font is a pretty decent size. But that's how uninterested I am in this after one chapter, is that it just feels like drudgery. And I think in order to finish it, rather than sitting down and just blasting through it in one day, I'm going to have to just piecemeal it out for the next 5 days until it has to go back to the library. And I've got to be honest, I'm not even sure if that's worth it. And I hate saying that because I loved things before. But maybe I was tired that day. I haven't picked it up since the day that I read the first chapter. So maybe I'll try a little more today and see what happens. In the meantime, I've been distracting myself with the audiobook for To the Bright Edge of the World by Eowyn and Ivey, and I was super excited to pick up this book as well. And that just seems to be a theme so far this month, is that I'm super excited about a book and then really disappointed once I start reading it. And basically what happened is that I read The Snow Child a couple months ago, which is also by Eowyn and Ivey. And I really enjoyed that book. I thought her writing was beautiful. I loved the story. It was very engaging, very atmospheric. I had no complaints about it. I think it was even a 5-star read for me, or if not 4 stars. And so I was like, I am reading everything this woman writes. It's all going to be great. I can just tell. Uh, it's been okay. um, it's been so underwhelming that in order to make it past the first like 3 chapters, I had to switch to an audiobook. Because for some reason, I'm determined to finish this book. I think because I want to know for sure if I really just don't like the book. And I think I just don't like the book. It's okay. It's an interesting story. It's about Colonel Alan Forrester and his wife Sophie. They are separated while he is on a assigned mission for the army, I think. Where he's going on an expedition up into like uncharted parts of Alaska to chart this one section of territory. And he's going up the Wolverine River, and there's mystical things, and there's, the indigenous population there, and his wife is waiting back in Vancouver, and they're both experiencing their own struggles. It's an epistolary novel, kind of, sort of, because she's writing letters and journaling. He's journaling. There's a couple other people journaling. Can you tell I just don't really care? I don't know why, but something about this story just isn't doing it for me. Like I just don't care. And the audiobook is really good. Like each of the characters in their writing, they have different voices. There's even bits of semi kind of mixed media type of feel in here, and there's different voices narrating that. There's pictures. Like I feel like this is a book that I would normally say what's not to like about it, and I don't know because I don't like it so far. And I mean so far is like pretty far. I'm like 80-90% of the way through the audiobook, and I'm at the point where like I'm having to remind myself to turn the audiobook on while I'm doing things or just sitting there to actually listen to it and get through it because yeah, and I can't even figure out why now. So I'm gonna have to maybe sit down between now and my next weekly wrap up and see if I can figure out why it's just okay. But like if I finished the book right now, it would probably get a 3, maybe a 2. And I'm really surprised and sad by that because I really thought that this would be much higher. Like, I know people who say that they liked this book better than The Snow Child. So I really thought I would too, and I'm sad that I don't so far. And I don't feel like I feel like the best that the end could do is solidify it as a 3. So, yeah. So that's it. That's everything that I've worked on so far this week. I haven't started The Mysteries of Paris yet. Um, yeah, I don't know. Those last 2 books really have me like so I really need to finish To the Bright Edge of the World so that I can start one of my other library books that I'm excited about and will like. Because at this point, other than Ladies of the Club, I'm not reading anything that I'm particularly enjoying, which is sad because I felt like I had a super strong start with Station 11 and Snowflower and the Secret Fan, because those I both really enjoyed. I read each of them in one day and I was like, yes, yes, short books are great and the library is going to be awesome. And that like just went downhill really fast. So that was my week. Let me know how your week went and what you're reading, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.